गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। हाल ही में ब्रिक्स का समिट समाप्त हुआ था और इसी के बारे में हम बात करेंगे और विषय होगा इंडिया एंड आउटकम्स ऑफ द ब्रिक्स समिट। और इसके बारे में चर्चा करने के लिए मेरे साथ हैं श्री गुरजीत सिंह, जो हमारे एम्बेसडर रह चुके हैं जर्मनी, अफ्रीकन यूनियन और एशियन में। सर, गुड इवनिंग and welcome to Gana Short once again.
Thank you for having me.
And it's a great pleasure क्योंकि जो पिछले बार हमने अफ्रीका के बारे में बात किया था, उसका काफी रेजोनेंस हुआ था एंड वी चोज अ टॉपिक वेयर जो एक नया दृश्य सबको मिला। सबको पता ही नहीं था कि अफ्रीका में हमारा इतना इन्फ्लुएंस है और इतना अपॉर्चुनिटीज है। And I must thank you for it and on behalf of myself and all viewers at the outset. और आज हम, जैसे आपको पता है, दो दिन हुए ब्रिक्स का समिट खत्म हुआ। बहुत कुछ हो चुका है और ये नॉर्मली a BRICS summit doesn't get that much mileage like this has got, and this has got because it's first been held after a long time, after the COVID live, and there were a few issues involved. So I would request you to, outline the issues, and then we could discuss a few issues which you want to dwell on, and you could give your views because there are things like currency came up, the grouping, the alignment of the grouping, right, and the relevance of BRICS. All these issues have come up. So I would request, and उसके बीच में तो वैसे Chandrayaan-3 भी हमारा चांद में पहुंच गया। तो it was a great moment for all of us. तो आप feel free, sir. Just carry on, sir. And where you feel a thing we need discussion, I'll come in.
Thank you so much, Chandra Shankar. Very happy to be back on Gana Shot. And today I'm happy to talk about the just concluded 15th BRICS Summit. Now, I think there are some things we need to be proud of. And I think three takeaways which I can recall. One, that this BRICS summit happened when Chandrayaan landed on the moon. So, the body language which happens and the congratulations which flow in around that time gives a different demeanor to your participation in any meeting like that. The second one is that of all the leaders there, Prime Minister Modi is among the senior ones now. Xi Jinping perhaps has been there a little longer. Putin didn't come, but Ramaphosa and re-elected Lula later. So the confidence which Prime Minister Modi brings to that meeting is also palpable. So that is, allows you to shoot above your own weight. That I think is extremely important. And the third thing is that when you go to a country like South Africa, there is a large Indian diaspora, which makes a big difference to your participation. Not only do they meet you outside and they greet the Prime Minister, but even when, for instance, at the business summit, there were a large number of business people, either Indian or of Indian origin. So that gives you a solid flank. So you can see the warmth with which Prime Minister Modi was received at the business forum. This also gives you a resonance. So I think these were three elements of body language that I could check when I was watching this.
Yeah, I think that ये दो तीन आपने बताया बहुत important है, sir, because Chandrayaan gives you that additional weight and it gives you the indication that India has arrived on the big scene. After all, सिर्फ 4 ही देश हैं जो चांद तक पहुंचे हैं: रशिया, चाइना, USA एंड ऑफ कोर्स इंडिया। और यही बात नहीं है, हम भी उन्हीं गिनी चीनों के among the counted countries which have gone up to Mars. हमारा मंगलयान भी अभी भी घूम रहा है उधर. So it gives you that added heft, and right, and it gives a good counter to China also, that they're not runaway leaders of this pack. इन कॉन्फिडेंस की बात जो आपने बोला है वो बहुत अहम है और वो दर्शा गया जब हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने हमारा जो फ्लैग है नीचे से उठा के उनके अपने जेब में रख लिया आराम से, शांति से, एंड रामाफोसा हैड टू फॉलो दैट क्यू. right? So that confidence and everything was great. And जो आपने तीसरा बात बोला, the connect with the people, वो तो है ही. So क्यों मैं ये रिपीट कर रहा हूँ? क्योंकि बहुत मैं जितने कमेंट्री पढ़े हैं, ये जैसे तीन मूल पॉइंट आपने बताया, ये किसी कमेंट्री में नहीं आया.
Thank you.
नहीं, ये जो
You
पॉजिटिव
said,
है उसको हम गिनते नहीं है, हम नेगेटिव को गिनते जाते हैं.
well, this is where you see the reactions, no? Not what you say, also see the reaction. And what you said about picking up the flag, I'm a bit surprised that the protocol there put small flags as markers of where the leaders are to stand. Normally, they put very small name and you can read it. I have not seen in many meetings that there is a flag put there. So I'm glad Prime Minister picked up his own flag and leading others to do the same. So, how did we get to BRICS? I think before we look at where BRICS is going, I think it's good to understand. So, before BRICS, there were two, I wouldn't call them institutions, but there were two gatherings. One was the Russia, India, China Foreign Ministers Trilateral. This started, I think, in the late 1990s. And continued, I think the last meeting was perhaps in 2021, after which I have not heard of any meeting. The other one was the India, Brazil, South Africa trilateral. That started in 2003, also at the level of foreign ministers. So both IPSA and RIC were foreign ministerial level meetings. The IPSA was important because it was a three-continent, three-democracy gathering. India, Brazil, and South Africa. All emerging economies, but more important than the economy for IPSA was that we represented three continents and we were democratic. Whereas RIC did not have that in that. RIC had this slightly, let's get along in Eurasia and let's see how to challenge the G7. Now, President Lula, in his first avatar, he was very gung-ho about summits. So, when the IPSA was there, he proposed a summit. But India was never keen on it because we think that there are too many summits. And at that time, there weren't as many as now. Now there are even more. So, it's better to keep things at foreign minister level. But meanwhile, in 2003, also this concept of BRIC came out as an economic concept. It was not a geopolitical concept. It was not a strategic concept. It was a Goldman Sachs analyst saying that this is the four emerging economies who will do well and therefore need to be heard more. So the four economies that he mentioned had little geographical contiguity. At that stage were not the top trading partners of each other, but yet they came together in an amalgam to start discussing. And I think the first summit took place in 2006. This consolidated after the financial crisis of 2008. I think not the first summit, the first meeting took place there. The first summit, I think, actually happens in 2009. Right? And then in 2010, South Africa is admitted. Now, I want to make 2 points here. One, the admission of South Africa was a violation of the initial criteria by which BRIC came together. South Africa at that stage also did not meet the GDP criteria to be a member of a body like that. We were all emerged economies with a minimum threshold of GDP, which South Africa did not. But one of the reasons why South Africa was admitted is because they used to be a BRICS summit and an IPSA summit side by side. So what used to happen was that in the IPSA summit, China and Russia were not there. And then the others moved to the BRICS summit, leaving the South African out. So President Lula suggested, it makes sense. Why ask one of our colleagues to leave? Why don't we just include them? But at that time, there was a moratorium on expansion of BRICS. And China breached that moratorium, made a consensus that admitted South Africa. So we have always been hesitant in setting the agenda for the change. Whereas China said, oh, let me go and do it. Now, South Africa is our friend, the bigger friend in 2009 also. So why would we say no? Nobody would say no. But somehow we never took that lead, even though South Africa asked us. So in that context, BRICS was born. Now, BRICS remained largely an economic concept, but now the democratic dividend was not emphasized. Slowly, the IPSA element receded. We have not had an IPSA summit since 2011, though foreign minister level meetings continue even till last year. So, in a way, it is perhaps good to go back to IPSA at the level of foreign ministers. And RIC never really had a summit. So, it is back to BRICS. Now, what did BRICS do in this period till now? It was expected to contribute to the greater good of the global south, the developing countries. And by bringing in 4 emerging economies and a would-be emerging economy, the idea was to create economic momentum which would give a different direction to global development. And in many areas like WTO, like the climate negotiations, several of the BRIC partners would come together. Not exactly in the same configuration, but they would come together and negotiate together. So it was important what we were doing and trying to play a role. But BRICS was not an institution. It did not have a secretariat, still doesn't. It is a rotational secretariat among the 5 countries. But the first institution under BRICS was the New Development Bank. Now, the New Development Bank was a very unique bank because it focused itself on the global south and it focused itself on areas which were important to us. Not only us, to the entire global south. Like even now for the in the action plan till 2026, it talks about 30% local funding, sharing a sustainable future, clean energy and energy efficiency, transport infrastructure, water and sanitation, environmental protection, social infrastructure, digital infrastructure. So all these are its focus areas and therefore they remain as part of the SDGs, which are of extreme importance to the global south. But unlike the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank set up by China, which is dominated by China, the NDB had equal share. I think it was set up around 2013 and it took a little bit longer to persuade South Africa to pay as much as others were paying. So out of a capitalization of $100 billion, $50 billion were capitalized by each of the BRICS contributing about 1/20th. So each one, I think, has an 18.98% share. So there is scope for others to join to make it to the capitalization of 100. Now, when you look at the current scenario, what is happening is, so let me just continue with the NDB and then we'll come back.
Yeah, please, sir.
So in the NDB, what happens is that they start admitting countries who are not members of BRICS. So this is not prohibited, but it seems to be easier. So you have Egypt coming in this year, Before that, the UAE and Bangladesh. Uruguay has also been admitted, but has not yet deposited instruments of ratification. Now, out of these four countries, UAE and Egypt have been admitted to BRICS. Bangladesh and Uruguay have not. So there's no direct correlation. Now, Egypt has got about 2.36%, not 18.98%. Bangladesh has about 1.97%. And the UAE has just over 1%. So UAE, despite being a very large economy, has actually a minuscule stake in the NDB. Now, I am a bit unclear whether they are supposed to raise their contribution to as much as the others, or do they have a lower? That is a little hazy. It's also unclear to me whether the other countries admitted to BRICS will now contribute to BRICS or not.
So the issue is that what will be the future of the NDB, New Development Bank? How will it expand? How will it help the global south? All this these are all works in progress.
Yes, their work is going on for the global south. So about 7% of their projects are funded in China and 7% in India. 5% plus is in South Africa. And about 2 to 3% of their current projects are in Russia and Brazil. Their total lending is about $30 billion from their capital of about $50 billion. So when they get more capital, they should be able to
They
do
will
more.
ship them.
Yeah, but to my mind, they should leverage their rating. Their AAA rating should be leveraged to raise more money.
Yes.
But that you can't do if you become a challenger to the MDBs.
Yeah.
Right. But the charter of the end of the New Development Bank says about 20% of their projects will be co-financing with other MDBs. So
Okay.
this rhetoric that you hear in BRICS is not there in the NDB.
NDBs.
We are challengers to the G7.
System.
Yeah, that is not there. So NDB is the one good thing which has come out. And India provided the first chair of NDB through the renowned banker, Mr. Kamath. Right now, Brazil has the chair and they have former President
Dilma Rousseff.
Yes, and she was there at the, BRICS
Summit.
business forum. So I am very happy about NDB, and that's why I'm talking about it first as a success of BRICS. What concerns me is that we should not let new members only draw on it without contributing. To me, that should have been an important criteria. Now, let's come back to BRICS. Where is BRICS going? So, when the BRICS started as a summit in 2009, 2010, India's relationship with the other four countries was actually quite convivial. We were all good friends. Today, now look at that relationship. And I don't think it has much to do with India. Russia can't attend the summit because of the Ukraine crisis. And they have basically shot themselves in the foot on their international standing. So today they are saying, let me find new paths and new friends who will stick with me. The Chinese are becoming more aggressive. They don't talk so much about the BRI anymore. Their own economy is a bit in jeopardy. They do not have that much money to give away to the global south. So they want to assert a geopolitical leadership of the global south, for which they see BRICS as a vehicle, just as they see the SCO. Now, this is giving a new dimension to BRICS, because BRICS is not a geopolitical, unlike SCO, which was a geopolitical concept with limited economic interaction. BRICS is the reverse. So Russia and China, for their own reasons, are wanting to see greater strategic heft in BRICS and therefore enjoin big power rivalry with the G7 more robustly. Now look at Brazil. After the last election, last presidency of Bolsonaro, Lula has come back, but it does not seem to be the same Lula. There seems to be some, pushback. So I think he's more reticent now. He was in China, he's talked to Russia, but he's not willing to be anti-West. He is still, like India, wanting to be friends with all and remain the old BRICS. South Africa would like to be in that position. So they hold the BRICS summit. Very soon they will have the AGOA summit with the USA. AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunities Act, under which South Africa and several African countries have the privilege of exporting duty-free to the US market. They will also have the first South Africa-EU summit, which is quite odd because there is the EU-Africa summit. So why do you need a South Africa summit? But EU is playing South Africa that you are an important country, so talk to us independently and don't want it to go over to China and Russia completely. A tall order. I think ideologically speaking and economically speaking, given its economic constraints currently, South Africa is not a robust economy.
Yeah, therefore, I agree, sir.
So therefore, it is looking for inward FDI, inward capital flows. In the beginning, I said that when it joined BRICS, I never thought it met the criteria. So this is coming home to roost now. It is not in a position to contribute. It is in a position to take. And then you come to India. Our problem with Russia is of Russia's making. Our problem with China is of China's making.
China's making, yeah.
We have no problem with South Africa. But today I was talking to a very bright analyst in South Africa, and she said South Africa seems to lack the bandwidth to deal with too many contending countries at one time. And their domestic challenges are making them take paths which are heading in one direction at a time. So I think South Africa has chosen the Chinese bucket for now. With Brazil, I think things will look up with India. Now, if you look at the economic heft, China is by far the largest trading partner of all the BRICS countries except India. In 2022-23, the US has become India's largest trading partner, overtaking China, though China is second. But to Russia, Brazil, South Africa, by far, China is the dominant trading partner. So that gives it a different dimension. All the other countries have also benefited from BRI. We are the one people who said no BRI because you violate our sovereignty. So we are on a different track. When this whole question of expansion started at the previous summit in China, India was cautious because we felt this was the Chinese trick to bring in countries as they wish to give it an anti-Western flavor. Now, they did it in SCO. See, they brought in Iran. Next, they'll bring in Belarus. These are countries who are not pro-Western. But in SCO, India is a lone voice. In BRICS, there is IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa, who after the summit in China last year were on the same page, saying there should be criteria established to determine how to expand. So when this summit happens, Before that, it became evident at the level of Sherpa, at the level of foreign ministers, that there was no cohesion on the criteria. So it seemed, and many of us, including me, wrote this, and I think we were proven wrong, that there will be no expansion of BRICS. What there will be a BRICS plus approach. So there will be countries brought in on a graduated basis. Like in SCO, you first come in as a dialogue partner and then something and then you become. So we thought that there would be criteria to bring in partners. Even in ASEAN, it's the same.
Yeah, they did with us also the same.
So that was the expectation. And I'm not afraid to say that I wrote it and ultimately I was wrong. But I believe that when this summit took place and there was an agreement on criteria to be established and processes to be established to admit new people, and there is a paragraph in the communique which says the foreign ministers are tasked to find the countries who meet this criteria to bring in as partners. But something happened after that. Now, many other analysts and my colleagues say, no, nothing happened. It was what was intended. I believe not. I believe that China, Russia, and backed by South Africa, pushed for an immediate expansion. More than that, the countries who came in lobbied furiously. Now, none of them are our enemies. All of them are our friends. 5 of them are our strategic partners. We have no objection to any of them. So, as a result, even though a decision to establish criteria was taken, 6 countries were admitted, 5 of whom are India's strategic partners. One of them, Ethiopia, to whom I have been ambassador, is a good partner, and these countries are in. Yet that paragraph remains that the foreign ministers will look at the criteria and recommend partners. So that means the BRICS expansion is not over. More could happen. So, did India lose and China win? I don't think it's a zero-sum game. I think, after all, had we continued to veto it, it would not have happened. But when there were so many countries asking us, please let us in, I think we decided that everybody is ready to go on. Why are we being seen as the bad guy? And we have no problem with these countries. So let's go. That is how I think this happened.
I think you made very valid points. So the valid point is, well, there's a lot of debate. The debate is that, okay, by admitting these 6 countries, China will get the upper hand, right? On the other hand, like you rightly said, if 5 of these countries are your strategic partners, what is the problem? After all, these countries also will not swing completely towards China. In view of the fact that they are our strategic partners and they have also a lot of access to grind with us. And more importantly, they are not far away from us, except probably Argentina. They're all nearby. And we've had good relations with the Middle East. In fact, UAE is part of the I2U2 also.
Yes.
And you're looking at multilateral forums. So I go with you to say that, look, the expansion is not a bad thing, right? It doesn't put China in the driver's seat. And later expansion will be criteria driven. We'll see when it happens. And I'm sure things will change by then. And one thing which came out...
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, and one thing which came out was that China didn't have a free run also. So it was more of a give and take kind of a situation. For some people, like you rightly said, are of the opinion that we have given in and caved into China's pressure. Personally, I feel it's not a bad thing which has happened. And the global south has to expand. I mean, and India has always sought a role in the global south. So if BRICS is an established forum, and if you don't have a global south, and you don't have your voice in the global south, where do you go? So
True.
these are my views. I mean, I'll be
I,
grateful if you could.
yeah. So only my only concern is that after the last summit in China, the IPSA alignment was better. Somewhere that IPSA alignment has derailed. So I don't think India, Brazil, South Africa were. Otherwise, we could have, as 3-2, dominated the discourse. South Africa has clearly sided with China and Russia. And it very often it India, Brazil, and ultimately then uh, we agreed because everybody. It was not only the other BRICS agreeing; it was the
Others,
enthusiasm of the would-be members, which I think persuaded us that okay,
yeah,
my friend wants to be in. How am I going to say no?
yeah, that's also there. So I mean, we have to take everything into consideration. And let's face fact, in a changing world order, you have to be ready to change also as your status changes, as the status of the West changes. And if you're looking at more a greater footprint in the global South, we need to also change. हमें भी तो बदली करने की जरूरत है ये वही अटके रहेंगे तो वी विल बी ओनली सीन एज अ स्पॉइल स्पोर्ट बट
So
माय थिंग जो आपको मैं पूछना चाहता हूँ in terms of BRICS, the membership fine, it will expand, we'll see. In terms of the shift from a geoeconomics to geopolitics, ये ब्रिक्स को आप आगे कैसे देखते हो क्योंकि सवाल भी बहुत हैं कि क्या ये चाइना वाले डोमिनेट करेंगे क्या विल इट दिस बिकम अ व्हीकल फॉर द लाइक आपने भी बताया चाइना इज यूजिंग ब्रिक्स फॉर global domination along with SCO and China's agenda is very clear. तो इसका क्या what are the prospects कि BRICS will also become China's baby or you know one of its other this thing into the global south and what will
not,
India's role
not
in
easy
this whole
because
story?
Chinese economic heft is not there now. Most countries are coming to alternate groupings looking for economic advantage. But who is going to give you that economic advantage? That is an open question after this summit. That question is unanswered. NDB doesn't have enough to pay off everybody, no? So
आई
when
थिंक आपने ये जो आपने बात किया ना बहुत अहम बात है क्योंकि कौन कोई भी किसी के पास दरवाजा क्यों खटखटाएगा वो आर्थिक उसको फायदा होना चाहिए वो आर्थिक फायदा नहीं है तो वो आके आपके पास क्यों बैठेगा
right,
और जब चाइना का खुद का अंदरूनी आर्थिक स्थिति बहुत खराब है और उसका बीआरआई वैसे भी है बाकी सारे देश जो आ रहे हैं वो बीआरआई में है ही वो तो उनको कोई फायदा नहीं मिलेगा स्पेशल ब्रिक्स में आने का
true,
राइट
true.
तो और वो एज इट इज द बीआरआई लटक रहा है इट्स इन डीप ट्रबल तो द होल आइडिया कि चाइना का इन्फ्लुएंस विल बी एक्सपैंडेड हैज इट्स ओन क्वेश्चन मार्क्स दैट्स द
I
वे
agree.
आई लुक एट इट
Yes, I agree with you. Now, when we used to look at the criteria based expansion, generally many of us, and me included, and I must admit again, I was proven wrong, but I had a basis, was that each of the BRICS would bring in one new member. That means 5.
भाई तो
And,
अभी 6 हो
and,
गया
and I was looking at, actually, to be honest, we knew Egypt would come, we knew Argentina would come, and we looked at either UAE or Saudi Arabia. We looked at Indonesia and Nigeria. So what you got was 6, including Ethiopia. So who went out of this reckoning? Indonesia and Nigeria. Now, to my mind, these were 2 countries which met the original BRIC criteria of emerging economies, powerful economies in their regions, who ought to be in BRICS. So why are they not in BRICS? Now, my understanding is both of them are busy and did not push the envelope
ब्रिक्स
enough,
एजेंडा
like
या
Ethiopia or Egypt or others did. The president of Indonesia was in Johannesburg. He was invited. But even while leaving Jakarta, he said, we are not certain whether we'll be invited and we will join. You are diffident. Nigeria, I think, did not come. Nigeria is busy. And in any case, there is a Nigeria-South African rivalry. So I think South Africa picked Ethiopia, who is one of the important countries but not as powerful. It's not Kenya, it's not Algeria, it is not Nigeria, right? It's not that powerful. But interestingly, what you get from Africa is Egypt and Ethiopia, who in the northeast quadrant of Africa are two of the most populous countries in Africa, each touching almost 100 million people. This is important. They are also at loggerheads over the Nile waters and all that, but but I mean, there's economic possibility there. You bring in Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are energy balancers today, and they have large sovereign funds, so should be able to contribute to global south efforts of the BRICS more. Argentina was championed by Brazil despite their history of problems. So, what criteria was not used? That becomes evident. Democracy as a criteria was not used. Otherwise, Nigeria and Indonesia should have been it.
So, how do you view admission of Iran into this whole story?
This is an expansion of the SCO outreach, and I think initially we were bemused, but when it became serious and the Iranians spoke to us, this is part of our strategic autonomy. But yes, the moment you include Iran, you go with that narrative that BRICS is becoming anti-West. But then Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and UAE are not anti-West. So I think it's a balance, but I personally believe that we need more and more places to engage Iran, which is under sanctions by the US. And dealing with them in such institutions like SCO and BRICS is good for us.
Yeah, and we have a stake in Iran being it's our neighbor to Pakistan and Afghanistan. And
so
I've always believed,
I think, which was not used was democracy. Iran is also part of that. Second criteria, you have to be a major economy. Not used. Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina are not major economies. Another criteria which was not used was whether you will definitely contribute to the NDB and not only be a borrower. I believe there should have been a minimum GDP requirement to be a member. Then you become a country with economic heft. And I would have preferred a democratic.
I agree with you, sir. I agree with you, but then with having Russia and China non-democratic major BRIC partners, so I suppose we going ahead also इसके ऊपर compromise करने की जरूरत होगी कि everyone will not be a democracy.
I am not in government anymore, no. So I can say what I like. But I think I am not the joint secretary sitting there having to deal with it. But what I'm saying is there is a RIC vision, that's why that started, and an IPSA vision. So the IPSA vision is giving way to the RIC vision. That is clear.
Yeah, that is clear. And the challenge is very clearly in front of us. Okay, how do you handle this RIC vision and how do you take it going forward? Because the geopolitics at this point of time will go dominate the geoeconomics. Talking of geoeconomics and things like that, so there was also a lot of talk about a BRIC currency coming in to replace the dollar deals, and they also said, okay, yuan will make it foray. But ultimately, what resulted was a weak thing. Everyone will do trading in their respective currencies without anything. And that's also, as it is, people were doing. So how do you see this whole thing playing out and because this will have its effect on the geopolitics, because it waters down the geopolitical heft of BRICS.
Thank you. So Here was a purely economic concept being given strategic heft for no particular reason except to, I think partly it was some Russians analysts who raised this to poke their thumb at the West, and somewhere it was some Western analyst who raised this bogey to push the BRICS down. But in reality, this so-called de-dollarization is neither the agenda nor going to happen. There is no reference currency among the BRICS. There are only bilateral arrangements. All BRICS countries today can trade with each other in their own currencies. But when you are settling contracts, are you still not using the dollar as the conversion currency? That's what I often ask, and nobody answers it clearly. But it will develop. Now, the BRICS Bank, the NDB, that has started bonds in local currencies. So around the time of the BRICS business summit, NDB just raised a rand bond, and soon they will raise a rupee bond. So that means that if you are doing projects in our countries, you can actually use the proceeds of those bonds and whatever to lower the local lending costs. So that is an advantage. So that is one. The second is that the countries, and I have told you that China is the largest trading partner of all except us, but significant for us. Yuan trading could very well happen. I mean, the difference between, I think it's only in case of one country that Russia and I think China and Brazil are nearby. In every other case, China is by far the biggest partner. So the chances of yuan becoming their reference currency simply by the volume of trade is there. But let's not forget that India's effort to introduce UPI in UAE, for instance, which is now part of BRICS, is important. And we should now nudge this into other, and Prime Minister mentioned it in his speech, that these are the available, the 5 or 6 digital solutions that he mentioned. This is one of them. For instance, we have done an India-Singapore UPI arrangement. Singapore is leading an ASEAN payment system. Once that is done, Singapore could be the gateway for India-ASEAN UPI.
UPI system.
Yes. So now in the case of Africa, there is a payment system, I think it's called PAYSS. But India is not linked to that yet. I don't think South Africa will take you into that. But you can find ways of getting there. So you have to start this because UPI means the rupeeization of your trade.
Correct.
In a small
and no, sir. And also you give an alternate to SWIFT. The moment you put UPI in, you give an alternate to the SWIFT method of transfer of
the
funding.
SWIFT, in any case, RBI is coming up with its own SWIFT. So that will also.
So I think it's an okay thing which has happened. And most importantly, sir, the whole notion of an alternate BRICS currency, which is anchored by China, has gone out. And if once that goes out, it devalues the overall geopolitical heft of BRICS also. It's one thing. See, sir, the thing is that China and other countries were anyway trading in yuan, whether they were part of BRICS or not.
Correct.
By volume, by whether it's in BRI or I think China is trying to push yuan through and do trade in yuan. It's nothing special because of BRICS, it's going to happen. But
my last point, I would like to make, what is the outcome for India?
Yeah, that's important.
Yes. So outcome, this again, I must thank my friend in South Africa with whom I was discussing this today. And she said, interesting thing. She said, outcomes, unlike me, who is a practitioner, she is an academician. So what she said was, outcomes should be seen in 2 ways. One is, was the summit successful? And second, was the results of the summit successful? Now, I think for the summit, South Africa used the BRICS summit very much like we are using the G20. to raise our position, raise our stature. They called 69 countries to Johannesburg. They did everything. So I think, and just a few days before the summit, President Ramaphosa actually gave a foreign policy speech, which is very rare in South Africa. So for him, I think the summit was successful. For India, I think the summit was successful. If you go back to the reasons I gave you right in the beginning.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Our stature has risen. Our stature has risen. The expanded BRICS has our friends in it. And we are an equal partner in NDB. We should not allow that to be diluted. Now, Prime Minister Modi, in his speech and intervention, made very important suggestions. And he offered the gamut of India Stack, Bhasini, UPI, the CoWIN app, so many things, which is a different dimension because the level of trust in the global south in India is much higher than the trust in China. Even in a survey in Southeast Asia, in 2023, China's trust is diminishing, India's trust is rising. So this is a fact because we are a benign partner. We are not an intrusive partner. Now, our development cooperation is very well respected, but our lines of credit, which were dollar denominated, are not popular anymore. So in order to push these many brilliant ideas that we have, we need a new model of engagement. For one, can our lines of credit be rupee denominated? Can we encourage our institutions to raise local bonds in African currencies to help Indian investors in overcome local costs, just like the NDB is doing? Can India become a member of regional banks like the Trade and Development Bank or others and use their portals to provide local funding? So where is the financing for all these projects other than BRI? So India should do a little bit more. But yes, I understand our hands are constrained. This is where it comes to what we call trilateral cooperation. Now, in the past, I think in my last talk on Africa, I did talk about trilateral cooperation with G7 countries in Africa. But now, with Saudi Arabia and with UAE, for instance, as BRICS members, there can be an India, UAE or India, Saudi project in African countries. And these African countries need not be South Africa alone. That is where the Indians' advantage, along with financial acumen of our two strategic partners, will help the global south. And you can go beyond Africa as well. But I think these two countries are interested in Africa. So I think that is where India will continue to make an economic and functional impact on Africa and our developing partners. The fact that we are a member of BRICS is incidental to this effort. BRICS will benefit about how India does. But I don't think the BRICS is the determinant of what India will do.
I think that's a very important point you made. India is not dependent on BRICS. India can chart its own trajectory independent of BRICS, especially in West Asia and in Africa. So that's a huge opportunity. जो आपने बोला है, BRICS only reinforces that opportunity. BRICS opens up new ways because ये जो नए partners हैं, Ethiopia, Egypt, UAE and Saudi Arabia, इनके तहत you can make greater foray into Africa. So they give you better structures to come up. I think that's a very important point you made, Ki, and I think जो आपने major point of this whole thing is India's stature in the BRICS is gone up significantly, right, sir? So एक चीज मैं आपसे, how do you read the whole story of Xi Jinping not attending the business summit? and he, coming in with his aide running behind him. And the whole Chinese delegation as a whole seemed to be a little unstable diplomatically, or maybe even more. How do you read all this? And the fact that China has not been really been able to push its complete agenda through in this forum. How do you read all this?
I think Xi Jinping was doing two things. One is attending the BRICS summit. Secondly, he was on a state visit to South Africa. So he had two things happening at the same time. But that doesn't explain why, when the South African president is at the BRICS summit as his host, not going there and being in town is a bit of a dampener, no? But he sent his commerce
Commerce
minister.
Minister.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, he looked well enough to attend all the meetings. Perhaps he had nothing to say. Perhaps the Chinese economy is not healthy. BRI is not working. So there are more questions than answers in the Chinese approach to the developing countries.
Yeah, and I would just also add that on the sidelines of BRICS, he's met a lot of African leaders.
Yes.
Right? He's not stopped meeting. So in this context, he's not coming to that business summit with a bit of a thing, and we'll see how it plays out. ये तो बात निकल आएगा क्यों नहीं आया? As in China, nothing is straight. वो तो टेढ़ा मेढ़ा होके आएगा बाहर. We will see. So, thank you for your exposition.